Hello, hello, hello. Hey, hey, hey. I hope you're having a great day. We are back for another part of the Anne of Green Gables Read Aloud series. Today we are reading chapters 33 through 35. So it is our second to last video, and I'm going to be so sad that this series is over. I ran out of Anne inspired clothes to wear and Anne inspired things, but I did put on this cute little hat in my bookish era because I am obsessively right now listening to this podcast. It's called Every Single Album Taylor Swift because I am preparing for the Tortured Poets album at the end of this month to come out. So for my fellow Swifties out there, make sure to listen to that podcast to get yourself hyped. I highly recommend. As I mentioned, we are going to be starting with chapters 33 through 35. So there is a lot of other parts to this series. So if you haven't watched chapters 1 through 34, they are all linked under the live section on my profile, and they're all in a playlist as well. So that means you can just press start on the first video and they will play all the way through all of the videos. So I'm super excited to get back into the story. I am sad that it's going to be over soon. Hi, Joanna. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, bestie. I'm sad that it's going to be over soon because I've just been enjoying this book so much. It is one of my favorites, and I've just really enjoyed the experience of getting to read it aloud. I by no means have any aspirations to be a narrator or anything like that, but I do think that it's been a really good skill for me because it's making me practice like speaking aloud, and speaking to camera is essentially kind of like a public speaking exercise. So I feel like it's super fun for that. And doing the voices and things, like it's just getting me out of my comfort zone. It's getting me to try new things. So I've just really enjoyed this series. It's been a lot of fun. So if you're here watching it in real time, thank you. And if you're watching this in the future, thank you as well. I appreciate it. I am so glad that you found the series and that you've been watching along with me. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button and hit subscribe, both of which are free and both of which support me. Cool. Well, that's it. Time to get into the story. Feel free to read along with me. So that is what we call an immersive read, or just listen in. You can put me in the background as you do your household chores. I know I like to put other creators on when I'm usually doing laundry or like cataloging books in the library or cleaning up. So that's my favorite thing to do. Or when I go for walks. That's my other favorite. All right. Chapters 33 through 35. Here we go. This chapter is called The Hotel Concert. And any pictures that we come to in the story, I will make sure to show you as well. All right. Coffee. All right. Put on your white organdy by all means, Anne, advised Diana decidedly. They were together in the East Gable chamber. Outside, it was only twilight, a lovely yellowish-green twilight with a clear blue cloudless sky. A big round moon, slowly deepening from her pallid luster into burnished silver, hung over the haunted wood. The air was full of sweet summer sounds, sleepy birds twittering, freakish breezes, faraway voices, and laughter. But in Anne's room, the blind was drawn and the lamp lighted, for an important toilet was being made. The East Gable was a very different place from what it had been on that night 4 years before, when Anne felt its bareness penetrate to the marrow of her spirit with its inhospitable chill. Changes had crept in, Marilla conniving at them resignedly, until it was as sweet and dainty as a nest as a young girl could desire. The velvet carpet with the pink roses and the pink silk curtains of Anne's early visions had certainly never materialized, but her dreams had kept pace with her growth, and it is not probable she lamented them. The floor was covered with a pretty matting, and the curtains that softened the high window and and fluttered in the vagrant breezes were of pale green art muslin. The walls, hung not with gold and silver brocade tapestry, but with a dainty apple blossom paper, were adorned with a few good pictures given Anne by Mrs. Allen. Miss Stacy's photograph occupied the place of honor, and Anne made a sentimental point of keeping fresh flowers on the bracket under it. Tonight, a spike of white lilies faintly perfumed the room like a dream of fragrance. There was no mahogany furniture, but there was a white painted bookcase filled with books, a cushioned wicker rocker, a toilet table befrilled with white muslin, a quaint gilt framed mirror with chubby pink cupids and purple grapes painted over its arched top that used to hang in the spare room, and a low white bed. Anne was dressing for a concert at the White Sands Hotel. The guests had got it up in aid of the Charlottetown Hospital and had hunted down all the available amateur talent in the surrounding districts to help it along. Bertha Sampson and Pearl Clay of the White Sands Baptist Choir had been asked to sing a duet. Milton Clark of Newbridge was to give a violin solo. Winnie Adela Blair of Carmody was to sing a Scottish ballad, and Laura Spencer of Spencervale and Anne Shirley of Avonlea were to recite. As Anne would have said at one time, it was an epoch in her life, and she was deliciously athrill with the excitement of it. Matthew was in the seventh heaven of gratified pride over the honor conferred on his Anne, and Marilla was not far behind, although she would have died rather than admit it, and said she didn't think it was very proper for a lot of young folks to be gadding over to the hotel without any responsible person with them. Anne and Diana were to drive over with Jane Andrews and her brother Billy in their double-seated buggy, and several other Avonlea girls and boys were going too. There was a party of visitors expected out from town, and after the concert, a supper was to be given to the performers. "Do you really think the organdy will be best?" queried Anne anxiously. "I don't think it's as pretty as my blue-flowered muslin, and it certainly isn't so fashionable." "But it suits you ever so much better," said Diana. "It's so soft and frilly and clinging. The muslin is stiff, and it makes you look too dressed up. But the organdy seems as if it grew on you." Anne sighed and yielded. Diana was beginning to have a reputation for notable taste in dressing, and her advice on such subjects was much sought after. She was looking very pretty herself on this particular night in a dress of a lovely wild rose pink, from which Anne was forever debarred. But she was not to take any part in the concert, so her appearance was of minor importance. All her pains were bestowed upon Anne, who, she vowed, must, for the credit of Avonlea, be dressed and combed and adorned to the Queen's taste. "Pull out that frill a little more. So, here, let me tie up your sash. Now for your slippers, I'm going to braid your hair in 2 thick braids and tie them halfway up with white big bows. No, don't pull out a single curl over your forehead. Just have the soft part. There is no way you do your hair that suits you so well, Anne, and Mrs. Allen says you look a lot like a Madonna when you put it so. I shall fasten this little white house rose just behind your ear. There was just one on my bush, and I saved it for you." "Shall I put my pearl beads on?" asked Anne. "Matthew brought a string from town last week, and I know he'd like to see them on me." Diana pursed up her lips, put her black head on one side critically, and finally pronounced in favor of the beads, which thereupon tied around Anne's slim milk-white throat. "There's something so stylish about you, Anne," said Diana with unenvious admiration. "You hold your head with such an air. I suppose it's your figure. I'm just a dumpling. I've always been afraid of it, and now I know it is so. Well, I suppose I shall just have to resign myself to it." "Oh, but you have such dimples," said Anne, smiling affectionately into the pretty, vivacious face so near her own. "Lovely dimples, like little dents in cream." I have given up all hope of dimples. My dimple dream will never ever come true. But so many of my dreams have that, and I mustn't complain. Am I all ready now? All ready, assured Diana as Marilla appeared in the doorway, a gaunt figure with grayer hair than of yore and no fewer angles, but with a much softer face. Come right in and look at our elocutionist, Marilla. Doesn't she look lovely? Marilla emitted a sound between a sniff and a grunt. She looks neat and proper. I like that way of fixing her hair. But I expect she'll ruin that dress driving over there in the dust and dew with it, and it looks most too thin for these damp nights. Organdy's the most unserviceable stuff in the world anyhow, and I told Matthew so when he got it. But there's no use in saying anything to Matthew nowadays. Time was when he would take my advice, but now he just buys things for Anne regardless, and the clerks at Carmody know they can palm anything off of him. Just tell him a thing is pretty and fashionable, and Matthew plunks his money down for it. Mind you keep your skirt clear of the wheel, Anne, and put your warm jacket on. Then Marilla stalked downstairs, thinking proudly how sweet that Anne had looked. And with that, and regretting that she could not go to the concert herself to hear her girl recite. Oh, I wonder if it is too damp for my dress, said Anne anxiously. Not a bit of it, said Diana, pulling up the window blind. It's a perfect night, and there won't be any dew. Look at the moonlight. I'm so glad my window looks east into the sun rising, said Anne, going over to Diana. It's so splendid to see the morning coming up over those long hills and glowing through those sharp fir tops. It's new every morning, and I feel as if I washed my very soul in that bath of earliest sunshine. Oh, Diana, I love this room so dearly. I don't know how I'll get along without it when I go to town next month. Don't speak of your going away tonight, begged Diana. I don't want to think of it. It makes me so miserable, and I do want to have a good time this evening. What are you going to recite, Anne? And are you so nervous? Not a bit. I've recited so often in public that I don't mind at all now. I've decided to give The Maiden's Vow. It's so pathetic. Laura Spencer is going to give a comic recitation, but I'd rather make people cry than laugh. What will you recite if they encore you? They won't dream of encoring me, scoffed Anne, who was not without her own secret hopes that they would, and already visioned herself telling Matthew all about it at the next morning's breakfast table. There are Billy and Jane now. I can hear the wheels. Come on. Billy Andrews insisted that Anne should ride on the front seat with him, so she unwillingly climbed up. She would have much preferred to sit in back with the girls, where she could have laughed and chattered to her heart's content. There was not much of either laughter or chatter in Billy. He was a big, fat, stolid youth of 20, and with a round, expressionless face and a painful lack of conversational gifts. But he admired Anne immensely, and was puffed up with pride over the prospect of driving to White Sands with that slim, upright figure beside him. Anne, by dint of talking over her shoulder to the girls and occasionally passing a sop of civility to Billy, who grinned and chuckled and never could think of any reply until it was too late, contrived to enjoy the drive in spite of it all. It was a night for enjoyment. The road was full of buggies, all bound for the hotel, and laughter, silver clear, echoed and re-echoed along it. When they reached the hotel, it was a blaze of light from top to bottom. They were met by the ladies of the concert committee, one of whom took Anne off to the performers' dressing room, which was filled with the members of a Charlottetown symphony club, among whom Anne felt suddenly shy and frightened and countrified. Her dress, which, in the East Gable, had seemed so dainty and pretty, now seemed simple and plain, too simple and plain, she thought, among all the silks and laces that glistened and rustled around her. What were her pearl beads compared to the diamonds of the big, handsome lady near her? And how poor her one wee white rose must look beside all the hothouse flowers the others wore. Anne laid her hat and jacket away and shrank miserably into a corner. She wished herself back in the White Room at Green Gables. It was still worse on the platform of the big concert hall of the hotel, where she presently found herself. The electric lights dazzled her eyes, the perfume and hum bewildered her. She wished she were sitting down in the audience with Diana and Jane, who seemed to be having a splendid time away at the back. She was wedged in between a stout lady in pink silk and a tall, scornful girl looking in a white lace dress. The stout lady occasionally turned her head squarely round and surveyed Anne through her eyeglasses until Anne, acutely sensitive of being so scrutinized, felt that she must scream aloud, and the white lace girl kept talking audibly to her next door neighbor about the country bumpkins and rustic belles in the audience, languidly anticipating such fun from the displays of local talent on the program. Anne believed that she would hate that white lace girl to the end of her life. Unfortunately for Anne, a professional elocutionist was staying at the hotel and had consented to recite. She was a lithe, dark-eyed woman in a wonderful gown of shimmering gray, stuffed like woven moonbeams, with gems on her neck and in her dark hair. She had a marvelously flexible voice and a wonderful power of expression. The audience went wild over her selection. Anne, forgetting all about herself and her troubles for the time, listened with rapt and shining eyes. But when the recitation ended, she suddenly put her hands over her face. She could never get up and recite after that. Never. Had she thought ever that she could recite? Oh, if she were only back at Green Gables. At this unpropitious moment, her name was called. Somehow Anne, who did not notice the rather guilty little start of surprise the white lace girl gave, and would not have understood the subtle compliment implied therein if she had, got to her feet and moved dizzily out to the front. She was so pale that Diana and Jane, down in the audience, clasped each other's hands in nervous sympathy. Anne was the victim of an overwhelming attack of stage fright. Often as she had recited in public, she had never before faced such an audience as this, and the sight of it paralyzed her energies completely. Everything was so strange, so brilliant, so bewildering. The rows of ladies in evening dress, the critical faces, the whole atmosphere of wealth and culture about her. Very different this from the plain benches at the debating club, filled with the homely, sympathetic faces of friends and neighbors. These people, she thought, would be merciless critics. Perhaps, like the white lace girl, they anticipated amusement from her rustic efforts. She felt hopelessly, helplessly ashamed and miserable. Her knees trembled, her heart fluttered, a horrible faintness came over her. Not a word could she utter, and the next moment she would have fled from the platform, despite the humiliation which she felt must ever after be her portion if she did so. But suddenly, as her dilated, frightened eyes gazed out over the audience, she saw Gilbert Blythe away at the back of the room, bending forward with a smile on his face, a smile which seemed to Anne at once triumphant and taunting. In reality, it was nothing of the kind. Gilbert was merely smiling with appreciation of the whole grand affair in general, and of the effect produced by Anne's slender white form and spiritual face against a background of palms in particular. Josie Pye, whom he had driven over, sat beside him, and her face certainly was both triumphant and taunting. But Anne did not see Josie, and would not cared if she had. She drew a long breath and flung her head up proudly, courage and determination tingling over her like an electric shock. She would not fail before Gilbert Blythe. He should never be able to laugh at her. Never, never. Here we go. Here's Anne on stage. Oh, getting up her courage now, smiling at the audience. Her fright and nervousness vanished, and she began her recitation, her clear, sweet voice reaching to the farthest corner of the room without a tremor or a break. Self-possession was fully restored to her, and in the reaction from that horrible moment of powerlessness, she recited as if she had never done before. When she finished, there were bursts of honest applause. Anne, stepping back to her seat, blushing with shyness and delight, found her hand vigorously clasped and shaken by the stout lady in pink silk. "My dear, you did splendidly," she puffed. "I've been crying like a baby. Actually, I have. They're encoring you. They're bound to have you back." "Oh, I can't go," said Anne confusedly. "But yes, I must, or Matthew will be disappointed. He said they would encore me." "Then don't disappoint Matthew," said the pink lady, laughing. Smiling, blushing, limpid-eyed, Anne tripped back and gave a quaint, funny little selection that captivated her audience still further. The rest of the evening was quite a little triumph for her. When the concert was over, the stout pink lady, who was the wife of an American millionaire, took her under her wing and introduced her to everybody, and everybody was nice to her. The professional elocutionist, Mrs. Evans, came and chatted with her, telling her that she had a charming voice and interpreted her selections beautifully. Even the white lace girl paid her a languid little compliment. They had supper in the big, beautifully decorated dining room. Diana and Jane were invited to partake of this also, since they had come with Anne, but Billy was nowhere to be found, having decamped in mortal fear of some such invitation. He was in waiting for them with the team, however, when it was all over, and the three girls came merrily out into the calm white moonshine radiance. Anne breathed deeply and looked into the clear sky beyond the dark boughs of the firs. Oh, it was good to be out again in the purity and silence of the night. How great and still and wonderful everything was, with the murmur of the sea sounding through it, and the darkling cliffs beyond the grim giants guarding enchanted coasts. "Hasn't it been a perfectly splendid time?" sighed Jane as they drove away. "I just wish I was a rich American and could spend my summer at a hotel and wear jewels and low-neck dresses and have ice cream and chicken salad every blessed day. I'm sure it would be ever so much more fun than teaching school. Anne, your recitation was simply great, although I thought at first you were never going to begin. I think it was better than Mrs. Evans." "Oh, no, don't say things like that, Jane," said Anne quickly, "because it sounds so silly. I couldn't be better than Mrs. Evans, you know, for she is a professional, and I am only a schoolgirl with a little knack of reciting. I'm quite satisfied if the people just like mine pretty well." "I've got a compliment for you, Anne," said Diana. "At least, I think I must be a compliment because of the tone that he said it in. Part of it was anyhow. There was an American sitting behind Jane and me, such a romantic looking man with coal black hair and eyes. Josie Pye says he is a distinguished artist, and her mother's cousin in Boston is married to a man that used to go to school with him. Well, we heard him say, didn't we, Jane? 'Who is that girl on the platform with the splendid Titian hair? She has a face I should like to paint.' There now, Anne. But what does Titian hair mean?" "Hmm. Being interpreted, it means plain red, I guess," laughed Anne. "Titian was a very famous artist who liked to paint red-haired women." "Did you all see the diamonds those ladies wore?" sighed Jane. "They were simply dazzling. Wouldn't you just love to be rich, girls?" "We are rich," said Anne staunchly. "Why, we have 16 years to our credit, and we're happy as queens, and we've all got imaginations, more or less. Look at that sea, girls, all silver and shadow and vision of things not seen. We could not enjoy its loveliness any more if we had millions of dollars and ropes of diamonds. You wouldn't change into any of those women if you could. Would you want to be that white lace girl and wear a sour look all your life, as if you'd been born turning up your nose at the world? Or the pink lady, kind and nice as she is, so stout and short that you'd really no figure at all? Or even Mrs. Evans with that sad, sad look in her eyes? She must have been dreadfully unhappy sometime to have such a look. You know, you wouldn't, Jane Andrews. I don't know exactly, said Jane, unconvinced. I think diamonds would comfort a person for a good deal. Well, I don't want to be anyone but myself, even if I go uncomforted by diamonds all my life, declared Anne. I'm quite content to be Anne of Green Gables with my string of pearl beads. I know Matthew gave me as much love with them as ever went with Madame the Pink Lady's jewels. Next chapter, chapter 34. Let me put my little bookmark in too. There we go. A Queen's Girl. The next 3 weeks were busy ones at Green Gables, for Anne was getting ready to go to Queen's, and there was much sewing to be done and many things to be talked over and arranged. Anne's outfit was ample and pretty, for Matthew saw to that, and Marilla for once made no objections whatever to anything he purchased or suggested. One evening she went up to the east gable with her arms full of a delicate pale green material. Anne, here's something for need it. You have plenty of pretty ways, but I thought maybe you'd like something real dressy to wear if you were asked out anywhere of an evening in town, to a party, or anything like that. I hear Jane and Ruby and Josie got evening dresses, as they call them, and I don't mean that you shall be behind them. I got Mrs. Allen to help me pick it out in town last week, and we'll get Emily Gillis to make it for you. Emily has got taste, and her fits aren't to be equaled. Oh, Marilla, it's just lovely, said Anne. Thank you so much. I don't believe you ought to be so kind to me. It's making it harder every day for me to go away. The green dress was made up with as many tucks and frills and shirrings as Emily's taste permitted. Anne put it on one evening for Matthew and Marilla's benefit and recited the maiden's vow for them in the kitchen. As Marilla watched the bright, animated face and graceful motions, her thoughts went back to the evening that Anne had arrived at Green Gables, and a memory recalled a vivid picture of the odd, frightened child in her preposterous yellowish-brown wincey dress, the heartbreak looking out of her tearful eyes. Something in the memory brought tears to Marilla's own eyes. I declare my recitation has made you cry, Marilla, said Anne gaily, stooping over Marilla's chair to drop a butterfly kiss on that lady's cheek. Now, I call that a positive triumph. No, I wasn't crying over your piece, said Marilla, who would have scorned to be betrayed into such weakness by any poetry stuff. I just couldn't help thinking of the little girl that you used to be, Anne, and I was wishing that you could have stayed a little girl, even with all your queer ways. You've grown up now and you're going away, and you look so tall and stylish and so different altogether in that dress, as if you didn't belong in Avonlea at all, and I just get lonesome thinking it all over. Marilla! Anne sat down on Marilla's gingham lap, took Marilla's lined face between her hands, and looked gravely and tenderly into Marilla's eyes. I'm not a bit changed, not really. I'm only just pruned down and branched out. The real me, back here, is just the same. It won't make a bit of a difference where I go or how much I change outwardly. At heart, I shall always be your little Anne, who will love you and Matthew and dear Green Gables more and better every day of her life. Anne laid her fresh young cheek against Marilla's faded one and reached out a hand to pat Matthew's shoulder. Marilla would have given much just then to have possessed Anne's power of putting her feelings into words, but nature and habit had willed it otherwise, and she could only put her arms close about her girl and hold her tenderly to her heart, wishing that she need never let her go. Matthew, with a suspicious moisture in his eyes, got up and went out of doors. Under the star of the bluey summer night, he walked agitatedly across the yard to the gate under the poplars. Well, now, I guess you ain't been much spoiled, he muttered proudly. I guess my putting into my oar occasional never did much harm after all. She's smart and pretty and loving too, which is better than all the rest. She's been a blessing to us, and there was never a luckier mistake than what Mrs. Spencer made, if it was luck. I don't believe it was any such thing. It was providence, because the Almighty saw what we needed, I reckon. The day finally came when Anne must go to town. She and Matthew drove in one fine September morning after a tearful parting with Diana, and an untearful practical one, on Marilla's side at least, with Marilla. But when Anne had gone, Diana dried her tears and went to a beach picnic at White Sands with some of her Carmody cousins, where she contrived to enjoy herself tolerably well, while Marilla plunged fiercely into unnecessary work and kept at it all day long with the bitterest kind of heartache, the ache that burns and gnaws and cannot wash itself away in ready tears. But that night, when Marilla went to bed, acutely and miserably conscious that the little gable room at the end of the hall was untenanted by any vivid young life, and unstirred by any soft breathing, she buried her face in her pillow and wept for her girl in a passion of sobs that appalled her, when she grew calm enough to reflect how very wicked it must be to take on so about a sinful fellow creature. Anne and the rest of the Avonlea scholars reached town just in time to hurry off to the academy. The first day passed pleasantly enough in a whirl of excitement, meeting all the new students, learning to know the professors by sight, and being assorted and organized into classes. Anne intended taking up by the second-year work, being advised to do so by Miss Stacy. Gilbert Blythe elected to do the same. This meant getting a first-class teacher's license in 1 year instead of 2. Oops. And if they were successful, but it also meant much more and harder work. Jane, Ruby, Josie, Charlie, and Moody Spurgeon, not being troubled with the stirrings of ambition, were content to take up the second-class work. Anne was conscious of a pang of loneliness when she found herself in a room with 50 other students, not one of whom she knew except the tall, brown-haired boy across the room. And knowing him in the fashion that she did not help her much, as she reflected pessimistically. Yet she was undeniably glad that they were in the same class. The old rivalry could still be carried on, and Anne would hardly have known what to do if it had been lacking. I wouldn't feel comfortable without it, she thought. Gilbert looks awfully determined. I suppose he's making up his mind here and now to win the medal. What a splendid chin he has. I never noticed it before. I do wish Jane and Ruby had gone in for first class, too. I suppose I won't feel so much like a cat in a strange garret when I get acquainted, though. I wonder which of the girls here are going to be my friends. It's really an interesting speculation. Of course, I promised Diana that no Queen's girl, no matter how much I liked her, should ever be as dear to me as she is. But I've got a lot of second-best affections to bestow. I like the look of that girl with the brown eyes and the crimson waist. She looks vivid and red-rosy. And there's that pale fair one over there gazing out the window. She has lovely hair and knows if she knew a thing or two about dreams. I'd like to know both of them well, well enough to walk with my arm about their waists and call them nicknames. But just now I don't know them and they don't know me, and probably don't want to know me particularly. Oh, it's lonesome. It was lonesomer still when Anne found herself in her hall bedroom that night at twilight. She was to not board with the other girls, who all had relatives in town to take pity on them. Miss Josephine Barry would have liked to board her, but Beechwood was so far from the academy that it was out of the question, so Miss Barry hunted up a boarding house, assuring Matthew and Marilla that it was the very place for Anne. The lady who keeps it is a reduced gentlewoman, explained Miss Barry. Her husband was a British officer, and she's very careful what sort of boarders she takes, and will not meet with any objectable persons under her roof. The table is good, and the house is near the academy in a quiet neighborhood. All of this might be quite true, and indeed prove to be so, but it did not materially help Anne in the first agony of homesickness that seized upon her. She looked dismally about her narrow little room with its dull papered, pictureless walls, its small iron bedstead and empty bookcase, and a horrible choke came into her throat as she thought of her own white room at Green Gables, where she would have the pleasant consciousness of a great green, still outdoors, of sweet peas growing in the garden, and moonlight falling on the orchard, of the brook below the slope, and the spring boughs tossing in the night wind beyond it, of a vast starry sky, and the light from Diana's window shining out through the gap in the trees. Here there was nothing of this. Anne knew that outside of her window was a hard street with a network of telephone wires shutting out the sky, the tramp of alien feet, and 1,000 lights gleaming on stranger faces. She knew that she was going to cry, and fought against it. I won't cry. It's silly and weak. There's a third tear splashing down by my nose. There are more coming. I must think of something funny to stop them. But there's nothing funny except what is connected with Avonlea, and that only makes things worse. 4, 5. I'm going home next Friday, but that seems 100 years away. Oh, Matthew is nearly home now, and Marilla is at the gate, looking down the lane for him. 6, 7, 8. Oh, there's no use in counting them. They're coming in a flood presently. I can't cheer up, and I don't want to cheer up. It's nicer to be miserable. The flood of tears would have come, no doubt, had not Josie Pye appeared at that moment. In the joy of seeing a familiar face, Anne forgot that there had never been much love lost between her and Josie. As a part of Avonlea life, even a Pye was welcome. I'm so glad you came up, Anne said sincerely. You've been crying? Remarked Josie with aggravating pity. I suppose you're homesick. Some people have so little self-control in that respect. I've no intention of being homesick, I can tell you. Town's too jolly after that poky old Avonlea. I wonder how I ever existed there so long. You shouldn't cry, Anne. It isn't becoming. For your nose and eyes get red, and then you see all red. I'd be a perfectly scrumptious time in the academy today. Our French professor is simply a duck. His mustache would give you kerwallops of the heart. Have you anything eatable around, Anne? I'm literally starving. Ugh, I guess likely Marilla would load you up with cake, and that's why I called round. Otherwise, I'd have gone to the park to hear the band play with Frank Stockley. He boards same place as I do, and he's a sport. He noticed you in class today and asked me who the redheaded girl was. I told him you were an orphan that the Cuthberts had adopted, and nobody knew very much about you and what had been before that. Anne was wondering if, after all, solitude and tears were not more satisfactory than Josie Pye's companionship, when Jane and Ruby appeared, each with an inch of Queen's color ribbon, purple and scarlet, pinned proudly to her coat. As Josie was not speaking to Jane just then, she had to subside into comparative harmlessness. Well, said Jane with a sigh, I feel as if I'd lived many moons since the morning. I ought to be home studying my Virgil. That horrid old professor gave us 20 lines to start tomorrow, but I simply couldn't settle down to study tonight, Anne. Methinks I see the traces of tears. If you've been crying, do own up. It will restore my self-respect, for I was shedding tears freely before Ruby came along. I don't mind being such a goose so much as someone else is goosey too. Cake? You'll give me a teeny piece, won't you? Thank you. It has the real Avonlea flavor. Ruby, perceiving the Queen's calendar lying on the table, wanted to know if Anne meant to try for the gold medal. Anne blushed and admitted that she was thinking of it. Oh, that reminds me, said Josie. Queen's is to get one of the Avery scholarships after all. The word came today. Frank Stockley told me. His uncle is one of the board of governors, you know. It'll be announced in the academy tomorrow. An Avery scholarship? Anne felt her heart beat quickly more than ever, and the horizons of her ambition shifted and broadened as if by magic. Before Josie had told the news, Anne's highest pinnacle of aspiration had been a teacher's provincial license, first class, at the end of the year, and perhaps the medal. But now, in one moment, Anne saw herself winning the Avery Scholarship, taking an arts course at Redmond College, and graduating in a gown and mortar board, all before the echo of Josie's words had died away. For the Avery Scholarship was in English, and Anne felt here that her foot was on native heath. A wealthy manufacturer of New Brunswick had died and left part of his fortune to endow a large number of scholarships to be distributed among the various high schools and academies of the maritime provinces, according to their respective standings. There had been much doubt whether one would be allotted to Queen's, but the matter was settled at last, and at the end of the year, the graduate who made the highest mark in English and English literature would win the scholarship. $250 a year for 4 years at Redmond College. No wonder that Anne went to bed with tingling cheeks. "I'll win that scholarship if hard work can do it," she resolved. "Wouldn't Matthew be proud if I got to be a B.A.? Oh, it's so delightful to have ambitions. I'm glad I have such a lot. And there never seems to be any end to them. That's the best of it. Just as soon as you attain to one ambition, you see another glimmering higher up still. It does make life so interesting." Next chapter and final chapter of the day, chapter 35, The Winter at Queen's. The Winter at Queen's. Anne's homesickness wore off, greatly helped in the wearing by her weekend visits home. As long as the open weather lasted, the Avonlea students went out to Carmody on the New Branch Railway every Friday night. Diana and several other Avonlea young folks were generally on hand to meet them, and they all walked over to Avonlea in a merry party. Anne thought those Friday evenings, gypsying over the autumnal hills in the crisp golden air, with the home lights of Avonlea twinkling beyond, were the best and dearest hours in the whole week. Gilbert Blythe nearly always walked with Ruby Gillis, and carried her satchel for her. Ruby was a very handsome young lady, now thinking herself quite as grown up as she really was. She wore her skirts as long as her mother would let her, and did her hair up in town, though she had to take it down when she went home. She had large, bright blue eyes, a brilliant complexion, and a plump, showy figure. She laughed a great deal, was cheerful and good-tempered, and enjoyed the pleasant things of life frankly. "But I shouldn't think she was the sort of girl that Gilbert would like," whispered Jane to Anne. Anne did not think so either, but she would have not said so for the Avery Scholarship. She could not help thinking, too, that it would be very pleasant to have such a friend as Gilbert to jest and chatter with and exchange ideas about books and studies and ambitions. Gilbert had ambitions, she knew, and Ruby Gillis did not seem like the sort of person with whom such could be profitably discussed. There was no silly sentiment in Anne's ideas concerning Gilbert. Boys were to her, when she thought about them at all, merely possible good comrades. If she and Gilbert had been friends, she would not have cared how many other friends he had, nor with whom he had walked. She had a genius for friendship. Girlfriends she had in plenty, but she had a vague consciousness that masculine friendship might also be a good thing to round out one's conceptions of companionship and further broaden standpoints of judgment and comparison. Not that Anne could have put her feelings on the matter into such clear definition, but she thought that if Gilbert had ever walked home with her from the train, over the crisp fields and along the ferny byways, they might have had many and merry and interesting conversations about the new world that was opening around them and their hopes and ambitions therein. Gilbert was a clever young fellow, with his own thoughts about things and a determination to get the best out of life and put the best into it. Ruby Gillis told Jane Andrews that she didn't understand half the things that Gilbert Blythe said. He talked just like Anne Shirley did, when she had a thoughtful fit on, and for her part, she didn't think it any fun to be bothering about books and that sort of thing when you didn't have to. Frank Stockley had lots more dash and go, But then he wasn't half as good looking as Gilbert, and she really couldn't decide which she liked best. In the academy, Anne gradually drew a little circle of friends about her, thoughtful, imaginative, ambitious students like herself. With the rose-red girl, Stella Maynard, and the dream girl, Priscilla Grant, she soon became intimate, finding the latter pale, spiritual-looking maiden to be full to the brim of mischiefs and pranks and fun, while the vivid black-eyed Stella had a heart full of wistful dreams and fancies, as aerial and rainbow-like as Anne's own. After the Christmas holidays, the Avonlea students gave up going home on Fridays and settled down to hard work. By this time, all the Queen scholars had gravitated into their own places in the ranks, and the various classes had assumed distinct and settled shadings of individuality. Certain facts had become generally accepted. It was admitted that the medal contestants had practically narrowed down to three: Gilbert Blythe, Anne Shirley, and Lewis Wilson. The Avery scholarship was more doubtful, in any one of certain six being a possible winner. The bronze medal for mathematics was considered as good as won by a fat, funny little up-country boy with a bumpy forehead and a patched coat. Ruby Gillis was the handsomest girl of the year at the academy, and in the second-year classes, Stella Maynard carried off the palm for beauty, with a small but critical minority in favor of Anne Shirley. Ethel Marr was admitted by all competent judges to have the most stylish modes of hairdressing, and Jane Andrews, plain, plodding, conscientious Jane, carried off the honors in the domestic science course. Even Josie Pye attained a certain preeminence as the sharpest-tongued young lady in attendance at Queen's. So it may be fairly stated that Miss Stacy's old pupils held their own in the wider arena of the academial course. Anne worked heartily and steadily. Her rivalry with Gilbert was as intense as it ever had been in Avonlea School, although it was not known in the class at large. But somehow the bitterness had gone out of it. Anne no longer wished to win for the sake of defeating Gilbert, for the proud consciousness of a well-won victory over a worthy foeman. It would be worthwhile to win, but she no longer thought life would be insupportable if she did not. In spite of lessons, the students found opportunity for pleasant times. Anne spent many of her spare hours at Beechwood, and generally ate her Sunday dinners there, and went to church with Miss Barry. The latter was, as she admitted, growing old, but her black eyes were not dim, nor the vigor of her tongue in the least abated. But she never sharpened the latter on Anne, who continued to be a prime favorite with the critical old lady. "That Anne girl improves all the time," she said. "I get tired of other girls. There is such a provoking and eternal sameness about them. Anne has as many shades as a rainbow, and every shade is the prettiest while it lasts. I don't know that she is as amusing as she was when she was a child, but she makes me love her, and I like people who make me love them. It saves me so much trouble in making myself love them." Then, almost before anybody realized it, spring had come. Out in Avonlea, the Mayflowers were peeping pinkly out on the sere barrens with snow wreaths lingered, and in the midst of green was on the woods and in the valleys. But in Charlottetown, harassed Queen's students thought and talked only of examinations. "It doesn't seem possible that the term is nearly over," said Anne. "Why, last fall it seemed so long to look forward to, a whole winter of studies and classes, and here we are, with the exams looming up next week. Girls, sometimes I feel that if these exams meant everything, but when I look at the big buds swelling on the chestnut trees and the misty blue air at the end of the streets, they don't seem half so important." Jane and Ruby and Josie, who had dropped in, did not take this view of it. To them, the coming examinations were constantly very important indeed, far more important than chestnut buds or Maytime hazes. It was all very well for Anne, who was sure of passing at least, to have her moments of belittling them. But when your whole future depended on them, as the girls truly thought theirs did, you could not regard them so philosophically. "I've lost 7 pounds in the last 2 weeks," sighed Jane. "It's no use to say don't worry. I will worry. Worrying helps you some. It seems as if you're doing something when you're worrying. It would be dreadful if I failed to get my license after going to Queens all winter and spending so much money." "I don't care," said Josie Pye. "If I don't pass this year, I'm coming back next. My father can afford to send me. And Frank Stockley says that Professor Tremaine and Gilbert Blythe were sure to get the medal, and that Emily Clay would likely win the Avery Scholarship." "That might make me feel badly tomorrow, Josie," laughed Anne. "But just now I honestly feel that as long as I know the violets are coming out all purple down the hollow below Green Gables, and that little ferns are poking their heads up in Lover's Lane, it's not a great deal of difference whether I win the Avery or not. I've done my best, and I begin to understand what is meant by the joy of strife. Next to winning and trying, the next best thing is trying and failing. Girls, don't talk about exams. Look at that arch of pale green sky over those houses, and picture to yourself what it must look like over the purply dark beech woods back at Avonlea." "What are you going to wear for commencement, Jane?" asked Ruby practically. Jane and Josie both answered at once, and the chatter drifted into the side eddy of fashions. But Anne, with her elbows on the window-sill, her soft cheek laid against her clasped hands, and her eyes filled with visions, looked out unheedingly across city roof and spire to that glorious dome of sunset sky, and wove her dreams of a possible future from the golden tissue of youth's own optimism. All the beyond was hers, with its possibilities lurking rosily in the oncoming years, each year a rose of promise to be worn into an immortal chaplet. All right, that's where we stop for today. We will start in the next video, if you're watching this live, in 2 days from now. And we'll start at chapter 36, which is called The Glory and the Dream. And then that'll be it. That'll be the whole book. Once again, thank you for hanging out with me. If you missed any other parts of this series, you can head to the playlist on my profile, and you can now listen to all of the chapters 1 through 35. And thanks for hanging out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, please, and thank you. And I will catch you in the next video, friends.